Do the candle, Edwin?
Okay, let's do it. I'll set the intention. I wasn't sure how much of this you wanted to incorporate.
I'll gauge the time.
Okay.
Based on that.
Let me know which part. So we've been trying different approaches, and this one, Denise will facilitate this meeting. So we'd like to start with setting our intention, which is to foster a culture of empathy.
There we go.
What?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, we're trying to build a more empathic world. And so we just get a thumbs up if that works for everybody. And we have a thumbs up. There we go. And we just to hold our intention, light a candle here just to remind us in the background. This is really good for mediation, I find, when we do empathy circle mediation, just to remind everybody that what we're there for. Oh, got a little canola oil
kerfuffle.
Yeah. There we go. There we go. Set that over here. Make sure the camera picks it up. Okay.
All right. So we are, just to sort of ground us in where we are, because not everybody was here last week, we are, we decided to work through the exercises in the book, in the Listening Well book. And this was chosen, the book was chosen as the sort of a guide, if you will, for the actual empathy training that or at least one version of it that we're looking at putting together. And what I want to say, especially to the newcomers, is that this book was written by Bill Miller, who is also the author and the main developer of motivational interviewing. So the book itself is a simplified version for anybody to pick up. It's the process is the same that we use in teaching motivational interviewing. It's just simplified. I actually really like his simplifications. For anybody to pick up and to be able to practice and develop the skills. So we did a couple of different chapters last week, and I'm actually going to cover, depending on the time how we can organize this, I'm going to cover either 3 or 4 of the chapters today, and practice some of the exercises that are there. So the other thing about it is these exercises have been around since the exercises that he does here and describes to people to do on their own are the same ones that were in the first edition of the book that came out in 1991. So it is, they are, oh gosh, got to get rid of my phone. They are, they have a lot of history, and those of us who do this use them regularly. And I'm going to explain a little bit about how some of the modifications that I do in terms of providing training. And we're also looking at this format being different than what you would do in a classroom situation where you have people all together and you're training them. So there's some modifications in terms of how I'm going to structure the exercises to do that. So we've already covered the in terms of the book, we've already looked at the sort of attitude that you have to bring, and this is called Listening Well. So it's really focused on listening skills and what we do on a very specific model of listening. So it is in the MI world, it is the listening skills are the primary way we convey empathy to others. But the empathy is more than just the listening skills, is seen as more. And we all know that, we've been talking about that, it's more. But that from the MI view, that how skillful we are at listening will enhance our ability to convey empathy to the people that we're listening to. So that's an important kind of distinction that we make. And we've already talked about the sort of attitude that you have to bring to being able to be a good listener, the willingness to suspend yourself and be engaged in someone else and listening to someone else. And all of these things in and of themselves are practices that are ongoing. We've talked about the nonverbal communication and cultivating our ability to use our voice and our body and our eyes and all those things to convey that we're listening as a part of what we're reflecting in the other person. And we've also talked about the roadblocks to listening, the very specific roadblocks that he talks about in this book, but it's a different list, if you will, from what maybe some other, like Edwin's got a whole bunch of roadblocks and things that are on there that might get in the way of empathy. But these are really focused on a particular model of listening and differentiating these roadblocks, even if you might use some of them at times, from listening. So the roadblocks, and this actually, as we go into the first chapter on this, on questions, the roadblocks are seen as things that can actually interfere with listening. They are things that bring the attention back to the listener about what we think is important, or what questions we want to ask, or what our intellectual curiosity is driving. They pull it back to us rather than to the person that we're listening to. So they can interfere with that. So what we're practicing today, what we're going to start practicing on reflections, is really like, well, if you're not doing any of those things, if you're not questioning, and you're not probing, and you're not analyzing or figuring out what's going on, or you're not doing those things, what are you doing? And so that's where we're going to start today, is in the process of reflective listening, and what that actually is, what you're actually doing instead of any of those. So any questions about that? That was kind of just a brief overview of where to put it in the context, and I'm just wondering if anybody has any questions. Okay. All right. Well, then we'll just move on.
I'll just say thank you. That was a very good, concise review.
Well, thank you. I've just been, actually, it's pretty funny because my online class I'm teaching is just now doing all of this stuff. So I've been reading all of their skill building exercises they're doing, and listening to them start their practice, and look at how they're starting to learn how to do reflection. So I'm like pretty steeped in it right at the moment as well. So the question, or the chapters that we're going to cover today are, he puts one on questions, and there's one on questions, and then there's one on forming reflections, and one on a deeper dive in reflections. And if I can finagle it, we'll also do affirmations, because that hangs with those more together. So from the MI perspective, we talk about these being questions, or open-ended questions, but we talk about open-ended questions, affirmations, and reflective listening being the very core skills that you use to do everything. They're the fundamental skills that you're using. It's just how you're using them that we might do a little differently from someone else. So, and what I will say is, I'm going to go through the series of exercises and the chapters, but also tell you a little bit about where I differ, where I might do them differently in real life. So, Bill starts with the chapter on questions and talks about the fact that, yes, there is a time and a place for questions. But we're really looking to cultivate certain kinds of questions rather than others. So really making our questions more open, encouraging dialogue, and not having a specific answer in mind, not a yes or no question, and also not questions that are designed to just be find out the details. So this is where many of us get caught, because we are sort of questioning mindset is, I've got to get all the details, I've got to find out all the information so that I can figure out what the problem is and I can solve it, or I can come up with a strategy, or I can figure out what they need to do, or that our mind thinks that way. And most of us are pretty good problem solvers, so that really gets in our way. But it is that questioning mindset that we're hoping to change. So the kinds of questions that we are looking at are more open questions that encourage the person we're talking to talk about what they think is important, not what we think is important. So he gives some examples in the book of how you can open up your questions and have people really exploring. And he gives lots of examples for all these exercises of the kind of open-ended question that could prompt a whole dialogue. So that said, that we're going to look at having open questions. The biggest issue in training listening is that questions are too easy. People just automatically revert to questions when they can't think of something to do, or it'll pop into their mind, or they'll be thinking, I've got to find that out. Oh, that's really important, and they'll dive into that. So for the practices, we really look at not using any questions to start with, to focusing on training ourselves to having reflection be the number one response that we give. So we're going to sort of set the questions aside and know that all the way through this book and any of the practices, there's some examples of really good open-ended questions that will stimulate conversation. And however, he does use the question in that chapter. He uses what we call the "do you mean" exercise. And we mentioned a little bit last time about that reflective listening was really based on making good guesses about what the underlying meaning is that the person is giving you of what they're saying or what they're talking about. And that good listening really relies on our capacity for, this is where we move out the questioning mind and we move in the reflective mind about taking in what the person is saying and how their body language and everything else, what they're doing, and being able to reflect back potential meaning for that. So the guessing piece comes from not being hooked on that you're right. It's like you're offering a guess. And the thinking part of it goes that not assuming that we know what someone means, first of all, because that's what we typically do. We think that, I know what that means when they say they're a really happy person. I know what that means, and so we assume it's true. We sort of cut off that assumption. And the thinking process is that we begin to get curious, like, I wonder if it means this, or I wonder if it means that, or I wonder about this. And so the question that forms in our mind is, well, do you mean this? Now, he has people practicing this. And what I will say is that I really limit the practice of that. I talk about it. I talk about the need to be able to think in terms of guesses. But I don't often give people the opportunity to do a lot of practice with the questions because they know how to do that pretty well. So I will give a little demo of what I mean, but rather than go around and have everybody do it, I don't think that we need to do that. So I'm just going to do a little demo, and I'm going to have you all asking me, and I want you to, I'll say something about myself, and I like to use strengths in these. What is a strength that you have that you have about yourself that you'd like to share about? And then I'm going to have you guys make some guesses about that, and we're going to practice doing just a couple of, do you mean this? Do you mean that? I'll have each one of you do one. That make sense? Okay, so one of the things that one of the strengths that I have is pretty newly discovered for me, but I've discovered a sense of creativity. So I'm a creative person. So I'm going to call on you, and I want you to just think for a minute, what do you think that means? And when you are reflecting on that, so it's not just the definition, but you're thinking more deeply about what it potentially could be in terms of, and again, you're not getting hooked on what's right, but how could that play out in someone's life? What could the underlying meaning be? Did you want to start, Alex?
Sure. Okay. Do you mean that you are good at thinking of ideas that other people don't think of?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So let's have another one. I'm just going to answer yes or no for right now. Next step, we'll go deeper. Deb.
Does that mean that you're finding you're enjoying expressing yourself differently?
Yep. Right.
Yes.
Does that mean you enjoy freshness and newness?
No.
Does that mean that you're curious and seeking other ways of interpreting existing information?
No.
This reminds me of the 1950s TV show, What's My Line?
Yeah, right. That's right. And when you're answering yes or no, and he points this out in the book, it's like, no, I got to qualify that. I really want to qualify that and say more about that. But you have to land on one or the other, and that's kind of just an arbitrary thing. Mm-hmm. But the important part. So, and when you think about that, the important part is that not all guesses are going to be right on target. And also, and that's okay. That helps the person, even when you're making guesses, if it's not exactly right, it helps the person think about it themselves. So this is something that happens in dialogue, and I didn't come in thinking, I'm talking about being creative here, and this is this and this, and I know exactly what it is, and you're just trying to find it. It is a process of realizing and discovering what it might mean for myself. Does that make sense? So it is not just that it is that there's one right answer to it. So you're making the guesses, and that's exactly what you're doing. But when we'll go to the next exercise, which is forming reflections, and this one we will end up doing in a round robin. But when you're forming reflections, they are statements rather than questions. And you're still thinking in terms of hypothesis testing or making guesses, but you're using a statement as opposed to a question. And that means you're dropping the question words, like what do you mean, or does that mean? And you're also turning the intonation down at the end. So, and he gives some great examples in the book of how so much gets carried in the tone. So if you're having a conversation and you say, you're really angry with your mother, as a question is really different from, you're really angry with your mother, as a statement.
Mm-hmm.
And they come across very differently. And this is a common thing that people do because they feel like they're being presumptuous to turn it up and to give, to turn it up at the end. They feel like they're being presumptuous. So they are scared to do that. And he talks about that it's a little bit, it feels a little bit risky, but you're not hooked on it. You're just offering it as a possibility. And based on what you're hearing and seeing, and also your own experience, that some of it's drawn from that, what you're choosing to reflect, and you're making some choices about what is it that you want to reflect. So the forming reflections has to do with just making it as a statement. So anybody got any questions about that, Deb?
Are there sort of degrees of forming all of these questions or feedback, reflections, based on how well you're willing to get to know the person right then and there, or how well you already know them, or they're just assuming, no, just this is the way of getting to know someone more?
I would say that, first of all, when you're talking with somebody that you know pretty well, it makes it really hard to practice the guessing because you make so many assumptions that you know what they mean. And the thing is that you typically don't really know what they mean about it, but because you have this long-term relationship or long-term connection, you think you know. So it's a lot easier to practice this with someone you don't know. And of course, there's no formula, but building our capacity for reflection builds our ability to establish relationship. And this is, again, the primary way that we establish relationship within MI, and certainly that's the perspective Bill's taking, that this capacity for reflection is our quickest, it's not because it's quick, but it's the easiest way into someone else's world. And that you are understanding and hearing about someone else's world, because you're turning yourself off and your own stuff off, and you're putting yourself in service of understanding their world. That's sort of the purpose of the listening. So it is, but in a normal conversation, if you listen to even Bill do these conversations, they just sound like normal conversations. You don't even really notice that he's doing, that he's just reflecting. It doesn't feel contrived at all to the person he's listening to.
That seems like that seems like a good exercise for us to do. I hadn't thought of that, of looking at him doing it on YouTube. So I'm guessing that's where he has them, right?
Some of them are on YouTube. Some of them there's a lot of different ones out there, and I can certainly show them to you. But it is important to know that in motivational interviewing, it is really different. So the examples that are out there are really they are focused on having a clinician or a counselor or a helper or something, and a client or a patient or a person or something. So there's a different relationship that you're looking at, a therapeutic relationship rather than a more mutual egalitarian relationship. And that and that's important to note. And it's also a conversation when they're actually doing motivational interviewing. It's a very specific conversation about change. So it's not just about understanding, so that what they choose to reflect and how they choose to guide that conversation are different when you're actually looking at motivational interviewing. But it certainly doesn't hurt to be able to view that. And I could certainly get you some things to view.
Okay, thanks.
And as a matter of fact, my students just listened to in this part, there's a sample out there of Bill working with a looks to be Native American man. This was filmed in the 90s, And I mean, they were actors, but and he's very silent. It's called the silent man because he's very quiet. He's not very forthcoming. He doesn't talk much. And Bill does virtually nothing but reflect. In the 10-minute sample, he does not know. He has 2 questions, and the rest is all reflections for the whole thing. And the purpose of it was to show how far you can go with reflective listening.
Oh, okay.
So in the book here, he talks about when the practice of having 2 reflections for every question as a guide, not as a absolute, but as a guide. And when you listen to Bill, he has about 8 to 10 reflections for every question. Mm-hmm. And so it is more like it goes, you're reflecting deeper and deeper, which is what the 3rd chapter is about. How do you conceive of going deeper and making and guessing about deeper meaning? This requires a lot of reflection of self, the capacity for that, generating possible meaning, and that also is a practice. So we don't have a very reflective society, so most of us did not learn how to be reflective growing up, and you know that from all the mindfulness-based stuff. And actually, there's a lot of mindfulness that goes into this, that it is in that state of mindfulness that you're more receptive. So I wanted, go ahead, Deb.
No, I was just going, yay.
So what I want to do is just using me still as this just for a quick practice before I put you guys to going round robin, so that you can start with me. I'm going to say again, I'm going to give you a little bit more about the creative, and I want you to be making some guesses, but I'll shape them because I want you to do it as a reflection. Most reflections, besides not having the what do you mean, or do you mean that, or the question words and the intonation at the end, are also in you language. They're just like using, you really like this. So as opposed to when we're expressing ourselves using I language, these are more about you're expressing them when you're doing it, the person you're listening to. So yeah, my newfound creativity, or actually I've always felt like I was pretty creative, but it was always in my head. I was always creative in terms of my work and my intellectual pursuits and those kind of things. That was really creative. And I've recently, in the last couple of years, discovered I never thought of myself as related to any kind of artwork. And recently I have been discovering a capacity for more art type stuff.
So you're enjoying a newfound expression.
Absolutely, it is. And I've been knitting. I knit wall hangings. And it just draws on part of me that I didn't even know was there. I didn't even really know was there and had much interest in. So it is really enjoyable.
So you want me to just one per person?
Let's have one person practice, because then we're going to go to each other.
Okay, so you find the knitting very enjoyable, and it's connecting with a new part of yourself.
Yes, it was interesting because I picked up knitting as a metaphor but lots to do with this work. I picked it up as trying to find a way of knitting together, of recognizing the sort of unity of all, and the knitting together of our families and our world. And that connection, like it's all part of the same thing. So I picked it up as a metaphor, and I was making coasters and for a long time, and then I discovered the more artistic side.
So you went into the knitting with the idea of expressing the the unity of things, and then along the way you discover this new part of yourself, this new artistic creativity.
Yeah, and how that unit, how that connection, like that, like you have one thread and you're making all this stuff out of one thing, and discovering that in other areas. And I started knitting pictures, like nature, and because it was a mirror, it was like a mirror, could see that in the as I was doing it. So
you're finding yourself sort of inspired by the idea of a single thread, kind of going through and creating these shapes and creating pictures and stuff like that.
Absolutely, it was very inspirational and kept me going. Good job, you guys. That was really good. You did a great job. So now we're going to have a little practice around robin, and this one will not include me. So each one of you is going to get a chance to talk about your a strength that you have. Okay, so, and you're going to have 5 minutes. I'm going to monitor the time, and actually I'm going to encourage you to, when we get to the end, I'll encourage you to give a little summary, because he doesn't talk about summaries in here. But when you've been listening for a while, and all you're going to do is reflect, so you're going to just keep practicing reflecting something deeper, and then I want you to, at the end, to kind of pull the really juicy pieces together. So not everything, you're not reflecting everything you've heard in a summary, but just a brief picture of what that person is drawing. So if somebody had been doing that for me, they might say, this is something you really discovered, this was something you picked up, for a different purpose, and you just discovered something new about yourself that's really connected you with, that kind of brevity. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So everybody's going to get to talk about a strength, and you can choose the person that you want to listen to you, to practice. And then we'll just keep going around. So does somebody want to volunteer to be the first person to talk about their strength?
I'll go.
Okay, so who do you want to practice their reflections?
Alyssa.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So I just share a little bit, and then she reflects,
Yeah,
and then
just
share
about
a
as
little
much
bit
as
more.
I did. So the important
Okay.
thing here in practice is that you don't just talk for 5 minutes about your strength, which is a little different from maybe what we're doing sometimes in the empathy circle. You want to break to give a person opportunity to practice.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, so one of the strengths that I've been told I have, and I guess I have, is perseverance. So with this empathy work that I'm doing, is I stick to it, and I just work at it and work at it. And I see all these other people kind of like going off in different directions, but I just keep sticking to it.
So a strength you have is being able to stick to something and see it over a long period of time. And you've noticed how other people act with relation to the empathy work, and you've seen the difference in yourself and your ability to just keep with it.
Yeah, and I don't understand. I'm not sure. I think of it as a strength, but maybe it's a little crazy too. I don't know. There's it's just taking something, grabbing a hold of something, and just taking it to the extreme. It's there's something about that. I don't know where I got it, but it's there.
So you feel maybe that it has a little of a crazy component to it. You don't know where it's coming from, but just being able to have that single-minded, just being attached to this one thing is definitely something that you see in yourself. Yeah,
and an example of that was I decided to go traveling, after leaving high school. And I didn't just go on a little 3-month, Europe tour. I went for like 10 years, just traveling all over the world. It was the same kind of thing, just taking this thing to the extreme and just, persevering.
So you saw this exemplified even when you were just traveling out of high school, like you saw that you went all the way with it. You didn't just stop at a little, like dipping your toe in, you just went for the whole decade.
Yeah, and I've heard that it's a German trait, is that the Germans like to take things to the extreme. So I don't know if that's true. That's something, sort of a cultural, ethnic thing. That's kind of my background. So I'm curious. I'm just wondering where it kind of comes from. Where does this quality even come from?
So you're looking deeper into the origin of this trait in yourself. You're wondering if it's, I guess, a cultural, maybe something that you've inherited from previous generations, or maybe you learned from them, or maybe is an inherent part of how your brain works.
Just sort of that curiosity. But there's also a sense, if you want to get something done, really do it well and kind of really create something. It takes a lot of perseverance. It's just, things just don't happen. It just takes a lot of ongoing commitment and work. So I think there's a sense of, for accomplishment, really getting something done, it takes that, commitment.
So you feel like maybe part of what makes you that way is that you need that in order to fully commit into something that you want to do. You can't just go in part way and then stop. You have to see it through the whole arc of whatever it is that you're doing. Yeah,
and it seems that there's also to go deep into something, to get beyond the surface, to get really deep down sort of at the core of something. It takes perseverance and a focus on that. And actually, a friend of mine that I traveled with, I think I learned some of this from him. He would take one topic, one theme, and just work on it for, like for a year. And so he was a real good friend of mine. And I thought, hey, that's a pretty good approach. Take one topic, like one value, one feeling, and dig into it, and as a way of kind of digging into reality, I guess.
So part of what makes you this way is at least like partially inspired by having this friend that you saw just go so deep into things that he'd pick something and go all the way down. And so you feel like that is like an aspect to what you do with it, and that you're not just scratching the surface, you're really diving in.
Yeah. So, but then there's also a quality. I've done things where I kind of grab a hold of something, and it's like, it seems a little, it's not neurotic. There's a word, I don't know. It's a little, there's like it's like I'm kind of struggling to find the word. It's too much, it's a little too extreme. It's too almost mentally ill or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. All right. This is a good time to, so I'm going to add another dimension to this. But Alyssa, how about if you provide a picture, a brief picture to Edwin of what your understanding of his perseverance?
Okay. So I guess in summary, what I'm hearing overall is that you feel like you have this strength in being able to persevere in things, but there's this almost duality to it where you wonder if there's a little bit of a crazy component there, and you've sought to find the origin of that strength.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just realized that what a great setup this was for practicing affirmations. So, in the first place, when we're talking about strengths, well, two things. One is reflective listening is, and Bill will say this really regularly, is affirming all by itself. The process of listening to someone is very affirming to the person that is being heard. But an affirmation is a way of helping ourselves, of providing an affirmation of helping ourselves recognize and acknowledge a person's strength or something about their character or their effort. So what I'd like to do is have the rest of us give Edwin an affirmation based on what he's been talking about. And we've all been listening, and of something that really acknowledges his strength. Most affirmations, the best ones are reflections, but reflections of what the person has mentioned, and he's talking about it as a strength. Now, he ended up on a little note about it also causes some problems, which of course is always the true with strengths. they end up, they're both our best friends and they get us in trouble. But the, to pick up on something about the strength. So how about Alex, would you like to give Edwin an affirmation?
Sure. I didn't read the chapter on affirmations, so I don't know if I'm going to follow the formula properly.
No formula.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll just take a shot at it. I admire your ability to stick to certain things, because I think I have the opposite problem where I jump around a lot, and I admire that you are able to stick to things like a 10-year travel adventure. Like, I admire that you're able to focus and concentrate, and I wish I had that quality in myself.
Good. So I'm glad you did that, because there are schools in motivational interviewing who say that bringing I into it is that it takes away from the affirmation. So when I don't believe that. I think it's really, it is really valuable. And you could have stopped at the first part. I really admire your ability to persevere. End. Mm-hmm. So when you continue, sometimes it will take away from it because there's too much words. But that was very powerful. That first statement was really powerful, and it's useful to convey the sense of your admiration, as well as reflecting how he sees it as strength. So good, Deb.
So I got a good sense of your fortitude, and appreciate that quality that you're speaking of, that quality in you.
Good. Did you want to give one, Alyssa?
Sure. From all that I heard, I can see that so much of the good that you've done with the empathy work, and even your ability to be open while you're traveling, that a lot of that is related to that strength in yourself. And so that strength seems to really have just done a lot of good, not just for yourself, but other people.
Good. Okay. So did that feel affirming, Edwin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, the extra stuff that Alex was saying, just seeing how he deals with those things, I actually found that quite interesting.
Yep.
So,
yep.
With the
so
confusion,
it's knowing it's being able to gauge what to add and how not to do it. So it's great.
Mm-hmm. But to see how it lands for other people, you
Right.
know, is just, it's very connecting.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So Alyssa, how about you talk about a strength of yours, and you pick someone to listen to you, and we'll go through the same thing.
Cool. I guess I'll talk to Deb.
Okay.
Okay. And so a strength in myself, I find that I'm a pretty open-minded person. I'm willing to look into sides of things that are really kind of opposite of how I think about things, and sometimes on a certain level feel offensive, but I'm still willing to look at it and hear about it.
So you find that you are open-minded. You like looking at the other side of what's being presented, even though it might shake you up or offend you, but you're still willing to look at it in a fair-minded way and address it.
Yeah, and that's also something that I've been committed to keep developing in myself. So I don't know if it's an inherent strength or something that I've kind of built over time. But I really find that sometimes I'm willing to dig deeper into another side of things that other people around me are not willing to listen to.
So you find that you're enjoying the process of committing to looking at another side of something that someone else won't, and that's inspiring for you to seek this, that keeps you open-minded.
Mm-hmm. And That relates to, I think, the empathy work too, because when I'm listening to something that like inherently kind of makes me want to push away at it, you kind of have to, I've felt like part of that strength is being able to just tolerate that experience and that feeling, and not just immediately push back at it.
So you've realizing and finding that the empathy work is helping to increase your tolerance of seeing difficult situations or hearing difficult information, addressing challenging issues. It's building your tolerance to hold this fairness and maybe equanimity about dueling ideas.
Yeah, and what we talked about earlier, that duality in strengths, I guess that applies to this too, because I've gotten in trouble, I think, sometimes for that. Because when you tolerate certain opinions about things, like people around you can, sometimes there are opinions and worldviews that are, it seems like they're more harmful than others. And so sometimes when people around me see that I'm willing to tolerate that, they think that I endorse it, or they think it's wrong to like give space to that. So I guess I struggle sometimes with knowing where that line is, and even knowing if that line needs to be there, or maybe just expressing to other people like where my mindset is in it, because it can give other people around me really the wrong idea about how I feel.
So you have maybe a little worry that this open-mindedness and tolerating other opinions may appear that you don't have good boundaries, you're open to anything, anytime, you don't know where you stand. You might appear that you don't know where you stand on issues, and that maybe you should start interjecting your own opinion about it, just so people get a different sense of you, that you're not just flaky.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes also it feels like when people react that way to it, it just really bothers me, because I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to pull back and being open-minded, because I want to have that other side. And it can be just really challenging when people seem to want me to put a lid on that. So that's something that I guess it's like a tricky strength to have, just because you have to fit that into other people and, be protective of the way other people who are looking in on that, how they are seeing it, and what kind of like triggers they have within that conversation too.
So you're really seeing how other people may be seeing you, and wondering if you need to shape how you present things differently, maybe even your inner self. Is there an ego that maybe should be interjected into this? The listener feels comfortable with what you're saying and with you, and relate. Maybe you're wondering if maybe they are not relating to how you're presenting it.
All right. So Deb, would you like to give a brief summary to Alyssa about what you heard?
Well, yeah, I really enjoyed hearing that, because I relate to that too, and understand that process of interjecting yourself as trying to find that balance between being who you are, which is a fair-minded person who likes to hold equanimity, maybe, or fairness, and those views to a situation, but also notice that others are uncomfortable with that. So how to hold that space, and what others may be projecting onto you, what they want from you, and what's true for yourself. So a little bit of there's a bit of a conundrum there.
All right, good. So I'm going to go around, do the affirmation thing, and I'm going to start because to show the strong, from the MI perspective again, and this listening perspective, The strongest affirmations are reflections, and they're really based on what the person has given on their own strengths and values. So I'm just going to do that. So Alyssa, you really value your ability to maintain that sense of equanimity in the face of dealing with others. That's a really strong value for you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, Edwin, you want to give an affirmation to Alyssa?
Okay. So what there's a sense of openness, a sense of being open to the world, and then trying to protect that, or to build on that, and to grow that.
Mm-hmm.
Alex?
Okay, so it should be more of a reflection of what she said, right?
Both are valid.
Okay.
So you can do either. It's just in the oftentimes when we bring ourselves into it, there's an evaluative component. So when I say, it becomes more, when we bring ourselves in, it becomes about us as the listener, oftentimes, as opposed to the person. And that's a legitimate thing to do in many occasions, but it's sort of knowing the difference between there, because this is a topic particularly that someone is talking about their own strength and why they think it's a strength and what it means to them. And so the strongest ones, it's like a self-affirmation. You're reflecting a self-affirmation about what they've given you, are the strongest ones. But as I said earlier, when you talk about, I really value this, or I really admire that, it is another level of affirmation that does convey, but it does carry an evaluative component. It's like, it's about me and what I think. That's good, but you want to be able to do both.
Well, there's another, I was kind of struggling a little bit with it, because another way of looking at it is, what is the impact on me? In the sense, when I hear of the openness, I feel my own heart sort of opening too, and I just feel like an openness and a warmth within myself, and a sense of hope kind of comes up for me. So I'm just sharing the emotional, the felt bodily impact that is a response.
And that would be really good. And even if you can also put it in terms of her. So your openness inspires hope.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a reflection, because she's talked about that.
Uh-huh.
She's mentioned that. And so you could do that a couple of different ways. Your openness really inspires others and it brings light. You could do that. That would be one way. And the other way would be, when I hear you talk about it, it opens my heart. That's pretty affirming. So both of those would be affirming. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Deb. Oh, you want to give one, Deb?
Alex was still.
Oh, Alex. I'm sorry. Alex, go ahead.
Okay. So it seems like it's very important to you to be open-minded and be fair, and kind of make a space for opinions, of even ones that you don't agree with. And I feel really appreciative of that, and sort of comforted, because I don't feel like there's not a lot of people in my life who are like that. And so it seems like people are pretty close-minded. And so I'm comforted by the fact that someone out there is open-minded. Yeah.
Cool.
Good. Did you want to give another one, Deb, or you want to? Sure.
I don't think I gave
Oh.
I don't know what I did. Don't remember that. Your ability to stay with your own process is inspiring to me.
Cool.
Great.
That was very affirming. All of that. So thank you, guys. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so Deb, you want to pick somebody to listen to you talk about your strength?
Yes, so I picked someone probably he hasn't been used, like Alex, right?
Yeah, Alex or Edwin, they have not listened yet.
Okay, Alex.
Sure.
So I'm disappointed because Edwin and Alyssa took two of the major areas of my life. So I would say I have developed through many challenges in my life and an astute clarity of how to, and I guess it's not so much evaluative, but it's like understanding the true nature of what's going on. An ability to, and people have said this about me, I have my finger on the pulse of what's going on. And so it's not quite very easy to explain, but I'm in tune with the underlying unspoken parts of people and situations.
Okay. So you have a strength to kind of be aware and pick up on sort of the subtle things of what's happening, and like people have said that you can have your finger on the pulse of a situation.
Mm-hmm. And the challenge has been that it picks up. I can pick up, what's not healthy and what's chaotic, and I've been pulled in by that. So I'm not. It's not so much that that's bad boundaries for me, but that I can. I'm early. I have early red flags about something maybe that other people don't notice, and I'm a very simple situation is I saw a dad not be very nice, quite abusive in a restaurant to a child, and I was empathetic to it. And my sister jumped on me and said, "Why do you always have to look at things like that? Why do you always have to bring stuff like that up?" And I'm going, well, because I really feel badly for this little girl, and I don't think it's right.
Mm-hmm. So you feel maybe a little bit of worry or something, because this is a great strength of yours, but you also see that sometimes kind of exposes you to some negative or some harder emotions, and even sometimes you bring them up to other people, like your sister, and now you're kind of exposing other people to these things that are going on as well.
Yeah, I'm not so worried about exposing her to it, but that you're right. It seems to other people maybe to be negative when you see situations that aren't good, and you notice it, and then you speak about it, and so it can bring a negative or darker component to it, and and not everybody, but some people just don't like to go there and see that and hear about that kind of stuff. And I've come to understand, it is a strong empathic nature I have. And then I'm just learning, well, how do you put it in such a way that makes it easier for people to understand and also be empathic, rather than shut down and say, well, I don't want to hear that. Let's just be entertained, or let's just eat our food. So I'm grateful for the processes I've learned, and give me the skill to put things like that in a framework that's palatable to other people, and that they also get inspired and say, yeah, I mean, this is okay to look at this, and it's okay to relate to it.
Mm-hmm. You feel really appreciative and grateful to have this ability, and you have a need to express it and use it with other people, but you're also wanting to do it in a way that other people find palatable, and it doesn't, that it's compatible with how they want to live life. Something like
Right.
that as well.
It doesn't leave a bad taste in their mouth, like, there's Deb, always, I mean, I have always been sort of for the underdog type person, always. And so, yeah.
All right.
Is that 5 minutes? That's so fast.
So engaged.
So Alex, I got to say that last reflection you did was a very good affirmation. It was not, in addition to being a good reflection, it was a really good affirmation. Would you like to give a summary?
Okay. So Deb, through her various life experiences and things she's done with her life, has developed this acute awareness to kind of see beyond the superficial elements of what's happening in a situation and kind of see the more subtle things that are going on. And she feels really appreciative of this. And she's kind of...
Can I stop you? I want you to use you and give it to Deb.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So yeah, so give it to her so that she gets the picture of herself from you, of
Okay.
what you heard.
Okay.
That
So
first half was very good. So I'll just...
The content was really good, but I want you to just use the you language and give it to her directly.
okay. So so you really are like appreciative and grateful, and you love this part of yourself, and you're searching for a way to kind of share this with other people in a way that will inspire them as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Good. That was also very affirming. So the summary was an affirmation in addition. So that's good. And Alyssa, you want to give a affirmation to Deb?
Yeah, I really heard in that you feel so much for other people, that it brings you to really see deeply into the situation and almost advocate for people sometimes. So you seem to really stand for just being empathetic through everything in life, which I admire a lot.
Thank you.
Good. Edwin, you want to give a...
So what I'm hearing is that you try to see beyond the surface what is deeper, and to engage in that, and that that's something that I think is it's I want to say hopeful. It's needed. It's valued by me too.
Thank you.
Deb, you have put considerable effort and time into really cultivating this ability in yourself. Like you really have worked long and hard to keep that ability alive and grow it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to give another one, Alex, or you, because you were very affirming?
I guess I'll stop on a high note.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, Alex, do you want to talk about your strength? And I believe Edwin's the last one standing for listening. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you're wanting to be part of it too.
Well, I tell you what, I might do a demonstration in the next part.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. This is one I just thought of as we were doing this exercise, but one of my strengths is that I'm very affectionate. Like to my cat. So it plays out with pets and relationships and in general friends and stuff like that as well.
So one of your strengths is an affection for friends, relationships, as well as cats and animals, sounds like.
Yeah, I would say it's I guess it's the willingness to express it, like to be very open about expressing it, like, petting my cat and like just kind of like, giving him lots of attention and love, and wanting to do that in relationships and with friends as well.
Mm-hmm. So there's another quality. It's a sense of having affection, but being open with that affection, demonstrating the affection openly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's, I like it because, I guess I like that I think I'm making a good impact on when people or animals are accepting of it. It seems to be a good, positive thing that I'm doing for them. So I like that I like to do it.
So you like that you're affectionate, and it's sort of a sense of contribution. Maybe you didn't quite use that word contribution, but you're contributing to the well-being of the animal and others, and you're also valuing the valuing of that, in a sense.
Yeah. I guess I could say, so like we've talked about and other people have talked about, sometimes I can be too affectionate or affectionate in inappropriate times or places, which can be an issue.
Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of concern, or you receive some criticism that you can be like overly affectionate or inappropriately affectionate in some cases.
Yeah. I know, I mean, like with physical expression of, you know, some people don't like to see public displays of affection or whatever, right? PDA, and some people don't like to be part of it because they're embarrassed. So that's one thing that I'm thinking about.
Okay, so you enjoy this affection, but then there's sort of like pushback or things that you're thinking about in relation to that public displays of affection is sometimes looked down upon, or other people may not feel comfortable with it. So you're kind of trying to understand and what are those concerns maybe by others.
Mm-hmm. And then I also would say, I think I'm a little, I could be more broadly expressive. I think a lot of times I'm very physically expressive, and I read this book, The 5 Love Languages, a few months ago, and I could probably, a flaw is probably that I'm living in my own language most of the time. So I'm speaking my language, expecting other people to speak it as well and interpret it. And maybe there are other ways of showing affection that are not physical, that would be more meaningful for other people.
So you're looking at how to address these potential criticisms of what you're doing, and you're seeing that maybe you're too focused on a type of affection. Maybe you can broaden the type of affection, the way that you show affection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how much more to say.
So kind of what else to say? What else to say about this topic?
It's not like a huge strength that's going to change the world or anything.
So you're kind of looking at what else can I say about this? It's not life changing, or not. It's not world changing.
Yeah. But I do think it's a strength because I think people appreciate getting positive feedback, and in one sense or another, feeling appreciated or receiving affection. So yeah, I'm glad that I enjoy doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so enjoy doing it. So, yeah.
Edwin, you want to give a summary?
Yes. So you value affection. Sounds like physical affection for animals and people, and that there is some pushback against that, some concerns about it, that people may not take it in a positive way, and there's kind of different reasons for that, and that you're trying to find how you can address those other people's concerns by maybe broadening your way of expressing affection, and but you are quite convinced that this is positive and the way forward for you, and and you value that.
Mm-hmm.
That was affirming. That was affirming there at the end too. And I want to point out that when you said, I don't know what else to say about this, and there was, and Edwin reflected that, you're not sure if there's any more there. You came up with more. Came up with more, and this is a really important part of this process. Is number one, allowing the silence, allowing that to sit so that you could reflect on it, and you came up with something that was really important. That other people really do appreciate this. They want positive feedback, and that was really a valuable thing to bring. That wouldn't have gotten brought up if the discomfort of being like, I don't have any more to say about this, if we just stopped it. Which I gotta say, I was tempted to jump in and say, okay, you only got 26 seconds left, you can stop, but there's so much more there. So that pause and that allowing in that reflective space brought a lot in. So that's my affirmation. You brought up some great stuff at the end.
Thank you.
Alyssa, you want to give him an affirmation?
Sure. I find that that's a really rare quality in people, to be able to be like openly affectionate and loving. So I definitely think that would be something valuable in other people's lives. I can see for myself that when people are like that, I really appreciate it, and it does a lot for me.
Good.
Oh, thank you.
Deb?
So your affectionate way of being feels very boundless to me, and it's not something you can really think about controlling. So it seems like a natural aspect of who you are, and it's seeming that maybe you're thoughtfully approaching how to be this way and others be comfortable with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
I didn't do it. I thought so I was already reflecting. Okay, so
you were reflecting. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So I don't know if I was supposed to do it. So yeah, so the connection, the feeling of connection that you're talking about, and it really warms my heart and kind of relax. I feel a sense of relaxation and openness and warmth by hearing you.
Well, thanks.
Good. So let's talk a little bit, debrief about what that exercise, what the practice was like. So what was the practice of doing this like for you? What did you get from it? What did you notice? Anything?
I felt there was a real sense. I really enjoyed it. There's a real sense, like hearing about the openness and the connecting, the warmth, the affection, and the sort of seeing behind, the reality going deeper. Each of these things, it really felt like I was growing. It's like I really was learning something about each person that just felt really good.
Isn't it amazing how much you can get in 5 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So it never ceases to amaze me. Anyone else?
I actually had just a lot of fun listening to everybody. I mean, you don't get to have these, I don't get to have these kinds of conversations very often in day-to-day life. You're kind of just going through things. So I find that it's something that kind of inspires me to try to seek that out more. And it's really helpful to have a little bit, to have more explicit tools for trying to get that with people. And also you all sound like very, very cool. So it's nice to be able to spend 2 hours talking to you.
This is a really unique format in doing that, and a value of being able to listen to other people's conversations, that you get the picture from everybody. That's a really different way that it happens than in a standard training, and we should remember that, because it is pretty powerful to get to be able to be the observer.
I really appreciate that in 5 minutes, as you said, Denise, so much, it's not so much, but the quality and the exact, that person really is sharing something very meaningful about them, and it helps people get, kind of meet themselves.
Yep.
In a certain way that they may have not had the opportunity to do. And so, as Edwin said, he felt he was growing, and it's because actually we were growing.
Yeah.
It's an exposure, but I don't see it as a negative exposure. It's an opportunity for exposure and growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is an honor to be the listener in a situation like this, to have someone be willing to share something like that, and being able to hear and honor someone's deeper thoughts, and it helps them clarify their thoughts as well. That's an important part of it. You're thinking, just like you started out talking about how it's really hard to put it into words, but when you were able to, through the process, really come to a better understanding for yourself. It is what it seemed through that process of listening, of really pulling it together. So it's sort of beneficial, mutually beneficial.
Well, yes, but the difference here is that I have people who aren't interrupting me.
Right.
I think that's the nugget.
Right. Right. Anything else from this that you got? Alex, did you have any comments about this?
I think that the doing the listening is really challenging and really fulfilling to do it, because it requires a lot of attention. And when you do feel like you mentioned in the chapter, it's not just exactly repeating their words that they're saying, but you're kind of taking these little guesses to kind of push them forward a little bit. And when you do take a guess and it does seem to move things forward, that feels really good. So I enjoy the process of listening and taking those guesses, contributing, even though you're just listening, sort of.
Well, that's a really good segue into the next part, because you all are already more skilled at being able to recognize that there's more depth and the guesses that are in your reflections. You already have some of that, as opposed to people that are starting new, that don't, aren't trying to do this, haven't been trying to do this. So if you just simply reflect back what you hear, and if you just reflect back what you hear, then it's going to just go around in a circle and stall out. It just stalls out. It's and if you keep reflecting it, then pretty soon somebody's going to go, what part of this did you not get? It's what I just said. It doesn't further the conversation if you're just repeating it. The other thing that happens is that if every time you try to repeat everything, then the conversation stays pretty much at the surface of where you are. So if you turn everything into kind of a summary, and your reflections are longer, it's like it indicates that they're kind of done with that topic, or that it's harder to move forward. So in the book, he gives, in the diving deeper, he gives some ways in which you practice. The practice of reflective listening continues to grow, and with a couple of principles. Less is more. is the number one principle, that less than a reflection is more. So it is, if somebody talks for a minute and you pick out one little aspect of that is intriguing and seems to have some juice, and you reflect that, you just come at that, it will deepen the conversation. It gives emphasis, or gives the space for the person to deepen their thinking about it and engage in that creative reflection themselves. So that you're not looking to have everything in the reflection, or you're not looking to analyze it or figure out what it is. You're helping the person discover and create it for themselves. So that's one thing, to keep it less is more. And there are lots of other things, and he mentions the sort of overstating and the understating, which is a useful thing to do when you're reflecting. But reflecting emotion is really, and that's one that people really shy away from. They're afraid to reflect emotion because they think they're being presumptuous. But to offer that sort of, there were several instances in these conversations where people would just light up. You could see the joy or the love or the anxiety or whatever emanating from them, and being able to reflect that and allow the person to sort of explore that is a really useful thing to do. Seeking that, reflecting that underlying meaning, and going for what the underlying values, what it says about a person's values. And again, you're still guessing, but you are guessing at a deeper level. So the way that we kind of think about this is that the tip of the iceberg is actually what's getting said. And as you know, underneath the iceberg is underneath the surface of the water is a huge iceberg. And there's all kinds of meaning there. And most of the time, there's so much more meaning than we could even imagine. So the practice of this has to do with continuing to learn how to complexify your reflections, how to add meaning to them and make them deeper and make them more concise. And that's where the edge goes as we continue to practice. Does that make sense? And actually in the practice, this exercise that we just did is exactly what you do to practice. You just practice listening to somebody and relying more heavily on reflections than on resorting to questions. So another way to continue deepening reflections are to transform any questions that you have into reflections. So that's a simple thing to do with the "do you mean this?" And many questions can be transformed in just using the same words, dropping the intonation and dropping the question at the word at the beginning. You can just say it as a statement. But also some of the deeper ones, like if you want to, and you're going to be asking some questions, but if you want to get a deeper thing, like, what would that look like for you? Or something like that. What would that be like if you were to do that? Perfectly legitimate question, but the reflective practice has to do with becoming good at making guesses about the potential answers to that question. And being able to offer that as a possibility. Again, it's not about being right, because the person is discovering and creating as they're going, and the wrong reflection can help guide the conversation as much as the right ones. But you're working to really develop that reflective capacity. So it requires shifting out of that questioning mind, putting on a reflective mind, which is totally the mindfulness thing, as Deb's been talking about, that the really putting yourself in that space where you're open and willing to receive what the person is giving, and you're not worried about what you're going to say or what you're going to do, because everything you need they're going to give you. but that takes a long time and a lot of practice and some of that perseverance that Edwin was talking about.
And I hate to put it in terms of this, but really in a way it's like, that's just your job. Your job description is this. I mean, sometimes we have to, put the boundaries on it. And when you're dealing with a subject matter like this, everybody begins to go, oh, I can be so open. And, and then they forget, well, you can be open here, but not here.
Right.
Know? And so that might be a good way of thinking of it. Like, my job right now is just to do this. When the plumber comes in, they just deal with the plumbing. They don't do the electrical.
Yeah.
That's your union job description.
Yeah, right. Well, we have there's in the motivational interviewing world, we talk about the sort of following versus directing versus guiding, which is motivational interviewing is both directional, and client-centered. So it's got both components, and but it's clearly moving in a particular direction. Mm-hmm. And we talk about the directive style is, like if it's very useful at times. If I go into the emergency room with a broken leg, I don't want them start asking me open questions like, well, what do you think the advantages of having a cast on your leg would be? I just want them to fix it. It's like that's not a time for that, the doctor to sit back and listen to me. Just do it. Mm-hmm. So there's a space. You're absolutely right. There's a space for that, and it's like
there's the Kenny Rogers song. You just know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
That's right. You got to know when to fold them. So that is, I don't think we have time to go another whole round robin, but I could do a brief demonstration of that back and forth of the listening. I could be the listener this time and have somebody talking about something. When you up the ante about what they're talking about, it becomes a little bit harder. And certainly in the situations where you're asking people to go into when they're listening to views that are very different from theirs and that kind of stuff, the ante gets really upped because we get triggered. But I could do that if you wanted to do a little demonstration. Otherwise, I could be done.
Okay, so I didn't quite understand that. You want to do mutual listening or like a deeper listening, sort of going for deeper feelings and values?
Yes, I could do a demonstration about this, about just to kind of, and you could pay attention to what things I'm actually choosing to reflect or doing that, how I'm deepening those reflections.
Okay. Yeah, that would be good if someone would like to. So I was hearing you're moving from questioning into deeper listening, and how do we deepen listening? And now you want to give a demonstration of how to deepen, that listening.
So yeah, in teaching the sort of idea about deepening reflections, we do that a lot of different ways, and one of the primary ways is to watch it and actually look at what people are choosing to reflect and what meaning they're actually adding and how they're doing it when they're doing it well. What are they actually doing? Because it's one thing to say, oh yeah, we want deeper reflections, but it's another thing to actually do it. Mm-hmm. So
are you or one of us or all of us giving a little story or what?
I'm gonna ask for this if that we'll do it, and we'll just do a 5 to 6 minute demonstration. But I'd like somebody that might be willing to talk about something that they would like to change about themselves. Mm. So this is upping the ante a little bit and upping the vulnerability a little bit. But if somebody's willing to talk about something they'd like to change about themselves, I'll listen.
I can do it if nobody else wants to. Otherwise, I'm not sure who was almost jumping on that.
Go for it, Alyssa.
And I kind of
about what you'd like to change.
I volunteered for this because I have been working a lot lately on anger. So, and expressing it in a better way. So I think that like I tend to be very reactive, and I don't even realize from the outside how that seems to other people. And so like for me, I'm just like, well, this is how I feel. I'm hurt, I'm angry, whatever. And I just kind of like express it without thinking about the impact on other people. And then that just kind of spirals into something. So something I'm trying to work on is like, I don't quite know how to put it into words, but learning to express anger in a way where it is constructive overall
Mm.
in the relationship.
So you experience the anger, and you're finding yourself expressing it, and you're not always happy with the way it gets expressed, or at least the impact of it.
Yeah. And I think also just the because I've done meditation, so I've tried to have this framework on a certain level, just like that reactive element in it, just that you are kind of like raw, just responding in the moment, and trying to find a way to dampen that initial reaction, because it usually just makes everything explode. I don't want to put too much. I try not to like judge my own emotions too much, but I've seen over time that it just doesn't really go to a good place. So I need to find a new way.
And you've started some exploration about that, and it's really important to you that you find a way to deal with your own reactivity. Like you want an alternative to that kind of that reacting.
Yeah, and I feel like when I like sit with myself and I try to think about it, a lot of the times those like initial reactions, they're so linked to like deep insecurities and anxieties I have. And so it's a little, I don't want to say frustrating, but it's like, you have these like issues, you have this baggage, and it's such a long haul of dealing with those things. So I wonder if, I'm not going to really get my anger and my sort of fury under control until I deal with those insecurities. And it's like, it's a daunting task also. So sometimes I just want to be like, forget it. This is just how I am.
You really discovered some of those deeper linkages with with underlying issues, and you're wondering if those might be important to kind of work through on this path.
Yeah, so I don't quite know where to go with it, because you want to be like protective of yourself and not like beat yourself up, but at the same time finding that space to be like like I have a problem here. Yeah.
And you really value holding yourself in a positive light of not judging yourself, and being able to see that it is in that sphere that you of not judging yourself that you might be able to move forward.
Yeah, because it seemed like it's almost feeding the fire. When I start to beat myself up over it, then it almost makes me worse, because then that makes me feel more insecure, and then it's that kind of downward spiral. So yeah, it feels, I feel a little bit lost in where to go next with it. Just kind of trying to work at it moment by moment. And then one thing I found helps is like when I have those reactions, something that can really kind of not fix it, but bring down that reactivity in the future is like when I have that reaction towards someone in particular, like let's say my partner, my mom, something like that. If I can manage to have a conversation with them where I feel like they listen to me about my emotions, then it seems to dampen it. But then sometimes even that expression can cause conflict, because I'm like, I just want you to listen to me, and then I get frustrated by not feeling heard, or there's just so many interconnecting parts.
There's something about, though, that when you're feeling heard, that sort of cools the fire, or doesn't does something different with the fire rather than feeding it. And you like to find ways of managing that fire so that it doesn't explode. And you've got some ideas.
It's just you live through life, and I can try meditation and things like that, which I try to work on, but things just seem to move so fast that I feel like maybe I need to find points where, sorry, my battery's running out. Points where I say like, okay, if I'm feeling this way, like I take a second and I pause, or maybe finding some like if then statements to guide me along the way. But I don't even necessarily know where to start with that. Maybe I need to journal. This is all an issue that I'm like dealing with right now in my life. So that's why I'm sort of just going and talking about it.
Let me see if I've got this. This is something that's really salient and current for you. You're really you're actively working on it, and you've been thinking a lot about it, and you're wanting to find an alternative to that sort of feeling like the reactive mode, and the fire gets fueled and you're off and running, and you want to find a way to be more intentional and manage that emotion, not ignore it or not get rid of the emotion, but manage the emotion in a way that has that is less explosive. It is less explosive and has less impact on both you and others.
Yeah, because I see a lot of the time like just how hurtful it is, which in the moment it's like I shut off my even awareness of how this person is receiving what I'm saying. And it's just like a kind of brutal way of thinking about that person. And afterward, I'm like, damn, like this is someone I really love and I care about. And it always tends to be someone I'm really like, that I really love. So just not wanting to do that type of damage too.
It's really, your relationships are really important to you, and you don't want to add damage to them, and you don't want to impact people in a negative way. And you want to be more, it really has a sense of wanting to be more in charge of your response that way.
Yeah. And also just wanting to be like a positive force in this person's life, right? Like I don't want to add, certain people, like they come from having this history of being abused or something like that, where I don't want to add to that in their lives. Like I want to be that person for them that's positive, and just not be a jerk.
Yourself as a really hopeful, positive and healthy part of your relationships, and with yourself and with others, and you want to maintain that and continue growing that. Yeah. Well, anything else you want to add because we're running out of time? We could go on for a while.
No, I could go on about this for a while, but no, it was very helpful to me. It kind of helped me air out the things that are already in my head.
That's a really good point. One of the things that we know about this and about the listening process is that it really helps people to voice things. And there is something, they come to learn how they think and believe and organize their thoughts when they voice them. They've been rolling around in their head for a long time, and they're oftentimes just giving voice to it can really help people get clarity. But so anything that you all noticed about what I was reflecting, not reflecting, choosing, not choosing, anything?
It seemed like you were focusing a lot on her values. You kept kind of bringing it back to like maybe providing some clarity to her about her reflecting her values, like her relationships and being, I don't remember, being fair and not being that brutal person and stuff like that.
Values are really strong. They're very strong motivators for change. People's values. So they really are helpful in linking that. Deb.
I didn't, I can't tell you exactly if you ever use the word do, like you want to do this or you don't want to do this, but it seems like you didn't use those words, which would indicate fix.
Yeah.
Or imply fixing. And then someone goes into their cognitive brain and misses other parts of their informative body. So that stood out for me.
You know, that's another important, I mean, and that is definitely an MI perspective. And this was a topic about change. So that I was falling much more into the MI than straight listening. But the why of change, the why someone would want to make a change is so important and really neglected. So yes, that's absolutely right. Like I actually trust that Alyssa can figure out what to do when the time is right. That what really is important is building up her internal strength and motivation to actually tackle something that's a very difficult thing to tackle, and she's been working on. She said that. So it's building up that internal motivation that is really important. And it's hard not to jump to the do, especially when she said things like, well, I don't know if I should keep a journal. I'm like, oh, I know 5 programs I can help you with,
Oh, yeah, I wanted to throw in MBSR.
Yeah, right.
I had things I wanted to throw in too.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys want to email them to me after or something, I don't want to run out of time here, but I'm open to those concrete suggestions.
Be careful what you ask for.
Anybody fixing the problem as you're walking out the door. Don't be giving advice as you're walking out the door.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I did notice the reflection. Then at one point, about 2/3 of the way through, you did a summary. It was a really clear summary, and then moved on to more reflection. So it was kind of mixing seeing the underlying values, the reflection, summarizing. It's sort of integrating the whole of it.
I did the summary because I thought it was going to be time to end, but she had so much more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is really a lot in my head right now. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I don't know. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah.
And I would encourage people to do that, to practice doing that. If we had the time, we would go another round. And actually, in the regular training, you give people about 15 minutes of only reflecting. You just have them practice only reflecting for 15 minutes, even if it's you're stopping and starting and pausing and trying to figure out what to do just to build that muscle. It is a muscle that you got to actively work. And I mean, I have to actively work it all the time too, or it will just go into disrepair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's ongoing practice. It's like it's the same as exercise. If I got my
there you go.
weights, and you got to do the empathy weights. You just exercise one time, it doesn't do it. It's like it's an ongoing thing. So,
you're building the habit and you're acclimating your reactions versus your response. And you're just, as the mindfulness does, self-training to not react the old way.
Right. That's right. You're retraining yourself. Absolutely.
So we will. Is there more?
I just want to say one thing, just thank you, because that was, a lot of the time with something like that, you just feel really bad about yourself. So having someone reflect in a positive way and linking it back to the overarching desire that I have to do good for others, it makes it less of a scary prospect. So yeah, that was very helpful to me.
I'm really glad you brought that up too, Alyssa, because this is another slant on it that I personally think is really important. It is to stay away from the problem and to focus on the hope and the being able to help someone envision this, not just a solution, but envision something better and see better and see better for themselves and see that is way more important than helping them dig into the details of that problem. Because we do that all the time, Right. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's that being able to carry and maintain hope is a really valuable thing. And that would be really valuable in going into any of the uses of empathy that we have, is to be able to carry hope and hold hope and envision. Just
Okay.
my personal opinion.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that.
well, maybe we need 3 hours for these meetings. So.
Well, I did
An hour for hope.
chapter in there. Sorry.
Okay, well, great. Wonderful. So thank you for facilitating these last 2 meetings. And there's a couple of people who couldn't be here, be on vacation, or Dea said she was just, just exhausted. So, and then, but next week, Deb and Dea will be facilitating. And what chapters is that then that we're doing? It was 10, 11, and 12. Did we?
No, where did you end today?
I ended up doing affirmations. So I ended up 10. I did 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay.
All right, then we'll do, I think we had 3, and now since you added affirmations, do you think how many more chapters going forward should we?
I think the chapters that you're digging into are going to take more. The ones that I've done are things that are really routine that we've done. So
Oh, great.
I don't know that you'll get 3.
All right, so which chapters? 11?
11, didn't we say 11, 12, and 13 were kind of went together?
All right. I thought so. I'm just double checking. I
Okay.
don't remember if affirmations was you or me. But okay.
Yeah, I went ahead and did affirmations, and I know at the end of last time I said I could probably, with that time, I could probably dump them in there, but we didn't finalize that. But the setup, when you're talking about strengths, it's such a setup for affirmation that it's a good time to practice it.
Okay, so it's 11, 12, 13, just do as much as whatever, as far as it goes, as the time allows. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
okay, oh, great. So, so in closing, we had set our intention, fostering a culture of empathy, and we want to take that intention out with us. We'll meet again next week, and between now and then, we'll take that intention with us, and we just blow that intention out, taking a deep breath from where we are. Put that out totally. So yeah, thank you. That was thank you again.